Surprise, surprise, it is finally happening. We have broken the Josh Mandel curse of $84,000 in Bitcoin. We are back above 90K a coin. But the bigger deal, the bigger question is, where are we going from here? Who cares about going from 84,000 to 90,000? That's just a couple of percent. Let's talk about the big move that I think is coming over the course of the next few months. And more importantly, talk about why it may not even matter when comparing to the grand scheme of things. We're also going to talk about why you are a 1 in 100,000 person on the planet. You are much earlier to Bitcoin than you think. So without further ado, let's talk about the Bitcoin upside coming up here in the coming months. And of course, as you know, probably today at the time of recording, Bitcoin is up 4 or 5%. Or so today. We had a big up move a few days ago. We had another big up move in the last few hours. And if you look back at the last 1 year, what you realize is that actually we've been pretty much flat for the last entire year, with the exception of about 45 to 60 days or so, give or take a couple weeks, right? And this is really important for you to mention before getting into the rest of the video, because we can be very complacent for months on end, thinking that, oh, this price is going to be here forever, but then all of a sudden, it can move really quickly. And when Bitcoin moves, it can be really rapid, it can be really violent, and it could be more or less permanent. I don't think we're ever going back down to $50,000 or $40,000 again. I think that there's a real possibility now that we may not even be seeing these $80,000 prices for much longer in Bitcoin's history. So before we talk about the potential price upside for Bitcoin when comparing to global money supply, I want to talk about a bigger concept. This is something that Michael Saylor posted the other day. Michael Saylor on April 20th, 420, Easter Sunday, what Michael Saylor posted was saying that based on public data as of Q1 2025, okay, so basically right now, over 13,000 institutions and 814,000 retail accounts hold MicroStrategy shares directly. An estimated 55 million beneficiaries of indirect exposure through Bitcoin ETFs, mutual funds, pensions, and insurance portfolios, okay? Now, the first thing I want to clarify is that I'm a self-custody maximalist. And so if you ask me, how much of my portfolio should I have in MicroStrategy? I'm going to say a very small percentage. I'm a MicroStrategy shareholder. I am one of those 814,000 retail accounts. Actually, I'm at least 3 or 4 of those retail accounts because I have different accounts at different places. But the point I'm making here is that I want to make very clear, if you have MicroStrategy stock and you don't yet have Bitcoin self-custody, you are making a dramatic error, right? And I'm not approving of that. That is a very, very bad idea. And a lot of people reached out to me at the MicroStrategy lows as of recent, right? When Bitcoin was, collapsing in the $70,000 range. Oh, it's all over, right? The people that were scared, the people that were reaching out to me, the people that were considering panic selling were the people who had stupid high allocations to MicroStrategy, 40%, 80%, some cases even 90 or 100%. That's not a good plan. But even though not all people in Bitcoin own MicroStrategy stock, I think that these stats Michael Saylor posted are actually really useful. And I think they prove you are so early to Bitcoin, you're not a 1 in 100 kind of person. You're not a 1 in 1,000 kind of person. You're more like a 1 in 100,000 kind of person, right? A lot of people listen to these crypto exchange mass surveys and they say, oh, well, 20% of America or 8% of America or whatever percent of America owns crypto. That's just not true. If you go out anecdotally in the world, you see that's not true. And if you actually do the data, I don't believe it's true, right? And so here's why. With a market cap of $85 billion, MicroStrategy, in my opinion, remains the most undervalued stock on earth, right? Why do I say that? Is because if half of the world's wealth went to be held in companies, right? The other half goes to individuals and nation states and churches and organizations, nonprofits, right? If only half of the wealth in the world goes to Bitcoin companies, for the sake of example, we're forgetting all the lost Bitcoin real quick. That's 10.5 million Bitcoin that all the companies in the world are going to be able to own. And MicroStrategy, Saylor's company, now known as Strategy, holds 5% of that 10.5 million stack. This is why I think MicroStrategy, now known as Strategy, MSTR, is perhaps the most undervalued stock in the world, right? Because if you're looking at in Bitcoin terms, they have 5% of the corporate balance sheet capital in their hands, or at least that's what we hope, since they haven't shown us the actual keys, right? But yet, despite that, conviction remains low, okay? I really want to emphasize this, because if you feel too late to Bitcoin, it is just your emotions deceiving you, right? Here's how you know you're not too late to Bitcoin. Michael Saylor has 4.3 million followers online. 4 million followers. Oh my goodness, Michael Saylor has orange pilled 4 million people. I'm so late to Bitcoin. No, you're not, okay? The reason why is that only 800,000 of them have had more than $1 worth of conviction. And that's assuming that 814,000 means 814,000 different individuals. Like I told you earlier, I have at least 4, actually maybe 5 different MicroStrategy accounts. So I'm at least 4 of those, right? If every MicroStrategy holder like me has at least, let's say, 2 accounts, that's only 400,000 people. That's not 18%. That's 9%, okay? It's potential, not inevitable, but potential that barely 10% of the people that follow Michael Saylor online have more than a single dollar worth of conviction of buying a stock. Okay, that's how early you are, right? Obviously, there's lots of people that have bought Bitcoin that follow Michael Saylor that don't own his stock, right? Obviously, that's possible. We'll go to that more in a moment. But I don't think you realize how small of a number that is. 4.3 million is a tiny, tiny, tiny number with the relative following he's going to have in the future, right? And a tiny, tiny number of the 4.3 million have actually bought a stock, right? And I suspect, in my opinion, at least 90% of that 814,000 number, 90% of those retail holders are going to have less than $100,000 in MicroStrategy, right? Number one, because probably at least half of those accounts are held by, the same individuals, if each individual has on average 2 MicroStrategy accounts. But the other thing to keep in mind too is that most people just don't have conviction, right? And I want to make very clear here, I don't care how much you have, right? Some of my clients that I help at the Bitcoin Advisor have 100 Bitcoin, and for them, my job is to help them increase their Bitcoin stack. Let's say go from 100 Bitcoin to 105, 110, 130 Bitcoin, whatever it is. I've got other clients at the Bitcoin Advisor that have 1 Bitcoin, and my job is to help them get up to 1.5 Bitcoin or 2 Bitcoin, right? Like I don't care how much Bitcoin the person has. There is always a way to help them figure out how to buy more Bitcoin, right? And the same thing is true when making a quote-unquote moral statement about who's being supportive of the network, right? And so I want to make very clear, I'm not saying, oh, if you have less MicroStrategy than somebody else, you have less conviction. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying most people that don't have a lot of MicroStrategy shares or a lot of Bitcoin or a lot of anything for that matter have that much conviction. I meet a lot of people that have 1 MicroStrategy share here, half a share there, maybe they have $1,000 of Bitcoin. I meet a lot of those people. That's just a huge part of the people in Bitcoin realm. The majority of people in Bitcoin probably don't have more than 3 months of their income saved in Bitcoin, because the majority of people that own Bitcoin own it on an exchange, and it's just, maybe $500, a couple $100, $1,000 or whatever, right? And so my point is that with those 814,000 retail holders, probably at least 90% of them don't have super high conviction, and so therefore that means probably most of them don't have at least 6 figures of MicroStrategy. Some of them have 7 figures or $5 million or $10 million, and some of you I know are watching. But the point is, the majority of that 814,000 don't have super high conviction, right? And so here's where you come in as the 1 in 100,000 investor. If you're a retail holder of $100,000 of MicroStrategy, meaning that you're in the top 80,000 or so of holders, right? Which would be about 320 shares, although this post is a couple days outdated, it's probably more like 315 shares now. You are likely 1 in 98,200. That sounds stupid. That sounds insane, but that's true. 8 billion people in the world, right? The majority of them don't have the same prosperity of living that you do. Most of them aren't saving their income or saving their wealth for the long term. And most of them don't have the capital plus the conviction that you've had if you've managed to acquire $100,000 worth of MicroStrategy shares, right? Let's put it another way. 1 in 7 people, and these are rough estimations, by the way, the concept is more important than the exact numbers. If you want to roast me with the exact numbers, do it in the comments, please. So let's talk about the concept. 1 in 7 people in the world has disposable income, right? The majority of the world is either poor or they're getting by paycheck to paycheck, right? And so they just don't have disposable income. And so I think that makes approximate sense. 1 in 7 people is fortunate enough to have disposable income. 1 in 3 of those people is saving for the long term, right? Some of the subset of people are spending it all. Some of these people are, not. Some of these people are spending it all. Some of these people just don't even realize that they're blowing it or whatever, right? A lot of these people aren't saving consistently for the long term. So I just think that's the case. Now, of those people that are saving for the long term, most of those people are saving in their bank accounts, in CDs, in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, all that kind of stuff, right? A very small number understands Bitcoin. And when I say understand Bitcoin, I don't mean has bought $100 worth of Bitcoin. I mean, like, understands this thing is really important, right? Let's say that's 1 in 150, right? A little less than 1%, right? Let's say 2/3 of 1%, something like that. Now, let's say of that subset of Bitcoin enthusiasts, 1 in 3 own MicroStrategy, right? Now, I think that makes sense, right? There are a lot of Bitcoin people I meet that have no MicroStrategy. In fact, I would say the majority have no MicroStrategy. And of the 1 in 3 that have MicroStrategy, you know, a lot of them have, yeah, I bought 5 grand or 10 grand just because I wanted to have some, because I want to learn more about it. And a few people have, you know, hey, I got 50 grand, I got $500,000, I got 3 million, I got 8.2 million, or whatever it is, right? So it's a very, very small subset. Now, granted, I'm very fortunate that I meet a lot of those people and I work with a lot of those people at the Bitcoin Advisor, but that's just because I have a massive filter, right? There's 50,000 people that follow me. You know, there's a few thousand people that follow me that are, you know, multi-hole coiners. There's a few dozen people that follow me that have, you know, more than 100 Bitcoin, etc., right? So obviously I'm a bit of the exception that I meet a lot of those people, but ultimately, like, that's only because you know, I'm not a 1-to-1 ratio, right? I make a video, 1,000 people watch it, right? Instead of me just going out and trying to find 1,000 random Bitcoiners on the street. And so let's say of that subset, that 1 in 3 that own Bitcoin, let's say 1 in 10 of those people own $100,000 worth of MicroStrategy, right? The point is, if you divide the total population of the world by 7, by 3, by 150, by 3, by 10, you get still in a different route, you get the same result of about 1 in 100,000, right? Most people have exposure to Bitcoin via, more people have exposure to Bitcoin via Sailor's Coin, MSTR, than ETFs, and this will only continue as MSTR eventually enters the S&P 500. And if you're bearish on MSTR stock price right now, you have to keep in mind that once Bitcoin hits $100,000, $105,000 a coin, which is not even at the previous all-time, once Bitcoin hits that price, and now that Michael Saylor has accumulated over 500,000 coins, if you assume he gets to 550, 560, 570,000 coins, by the time we reach $100,000 a coin again, and if you assume just a conservative 3x multiple, you're already looking at $800, $900 share price for MSTR, right? That $100,000 pretty quickly is going to turn into $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. That's why you need a long-term plan, by the way. And you can't just go by the seat of your pants, because your wealth has less in common with the near future and the past, right? You're going to make more money in the next 6 months than you made in probably the last 6 to 60 years, depending how old you are, right? That's how crazy the next 6 months are going to be, right? All these assets have to do is double or triple, and your life has changed. Your tax situation has changed. Your legal situation, your self-custody situation has changed. That's why it's so important to take care of this stuff now. But I digress. MSTR is a Trojan horse for Bitcoin, eating the premium of stocks. It may eventually trend to 1x against Bitcoin, and that's really important. You know, MSTR is not Bitcoin. That is why you should focus on getting self-custody Bitcoin. MSTR is a trade. Bitcoin is a multi-generational hodl. 2 totally different assets. Both of them are great. I own both, like I said. But even though MSTR probably has decades of volatile Bitcoin accumulation ahead, eventually, on a Bitcoin standard, I think it has a very high probability of eventually trending closer and closer back to 1x against Bitcoin, even if it never quite hits there. And so the summary of what I'm trying to say here, with taking some of this Michael Saylor data he posted and trying to channel it for all of us to learn about, is that we are so much earlier than you think. If you're watching this and you happen to have 10,000, 100,000, $500,000, $5 million worth of MSTR, you're not a 1 in 1,000 kind of unique unicorn. You're more like a 1 in 100,000, maybe even a 1 in a half a million or 1 in a million unicorn, right? If you understand Bitcoin, you understand it is better than any stock in the world, even better than Michael Saylor's stock, right? If you understand Michael Saylor's stock, his equity, his altcoin, let's say, you understand that it is a bridge for $100 trillion of corporate equity of that bubble to enter into Bitcoin equity. And sure, they're going to have a premium as that transition occurs and everyone's walking across the bridge, but eventually, once it's all on the other side, I don't know if it'll keep that premium. But either way, I think it's a really good bet for the future, right? And MSTR is a big deal because Bitcoin is 10x of a bigger deal. And so if you have 100 grand worth of MSTR, you're easily in the top 1 in 100,000. Not only with Michael Saylor's stock, but probably also with Bitcoin. Because if you're reasonable and you've been listening to me, you don't have the majority of your Bitcoin exposure in MSTR, you probably have it in Bitcoin. And so it's safe to assume if you do have $100,000 worth of MSTR, and therefore you are a 1 in 100,000 investor in the world in MSTR, it means you probably are at least that also in Bitcoin. You're early to MSTR, but you're even earlier to Bitcoin because Bitcoin is an even bigger deal. And so in just a moment, I want to talk about the future price of Bitcoin and how, yeah, sure, we can be bullish on MSTR, but really we are only bullish on MSTR as a function of bullish on Bitcoin price. But really quick, you can be a top 1 in 100,000. You can be the top 10,000 or whatever, right? But if you want to have a 1 of one experience, I highly encourage you to reach out. Let's have a conversation about you joining one of these Bitcoin events that I'm co-hosting, putting together with some friends of mine, right? These are not conferences, these are Bitcoin retreats, okay? These are pretty special events, in my opinion, because there are so far fewer of them, right? That kind of scarcity, I think, is a big part of the value, right? Many people will be able to say, I went to a big Bitcoin conference in some big city in some big hall where there were 20,000 people. Not a lot of people are going to be able to say, hey, I went fly fishing with James Lavish, and I went on a Jeep tour with Jeff Booth, and I had dinner with Michael Saylor, and blah, 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 all these things that I've been very fortunate to do in these retreats, right? So if you want to be able to say, hey, I had a campfire with s'mores with Larry the Pard, or I went on a glacier cruise with Adam O'Brien, or whatever, right? Like, if you want to be able to say you did that, and it's not just about saying you did it, it's like, it's really fun. It's really fun to get to know people that you respect, you admire, that are doing work that you really appreciate, right? And so if you have an interest of not only being a 1 in 100,000 early adopter for Bitcoin and MSTR, but if you want a one-on-one experience, highly encourage you to reach out specifically about one of these two events shown on the screen here. Bitcoin Zion, this is one of your last chances to sign up. There are 30, 35 people or so that are going. I believe there are 2, maybe 3 spots left. So it's almost gone. I suspect it's going to be gone within a week or so. And so if you want to join us, it's immediately after the Bitcoin Magazine conference in Las Vegas. You can join us out in Zion every single day. We're going to have hiking. We're going to have games. We're going to have Bitcoin trivia. We're going to have Bitcoin sessions and education in a big resort right next to the entrance of Zion National Park. Additionally, we're going to be talking about some products, Bitcoin loan products and other financial services coming to market that haven't yet IPO'd to the general public, but we're going to have conversations so you get early access or early understanding of the stuff that's rapidly accelerating the market. So if you want to potentially make some new friends, if you make some new business connections, if you want to meet some big time investors in Bitcoin land, meet some Bitcoin OGs, hear all their stories that they don't necessarily share on camera. If you want to be a part of this and have a one-on-one experience, reach out to the phone number on the screen. Let's have a conversation and have you join, because I would love to have you go, and it's a lot of fun for me to make these videos. And these kinds of events, I'm telling you, aren't going to be around nearly as much 5 years from now as they are right now. If that one doesn't interest you for whatever reason, you don't like nature there, maybe think about Bitcoin Alaska. It's a similar kind of event. This one's going to be much smaller. Instead of 30, 35 people, this one's going to be maybe a dozen people, likely less. But this is the first ever Bitcoin conference in Alaska, in Juneau, Alaska. So if you, like myself, have an itch to make it someday to Alaska because you've seen all the pictures, the nature documentaries, and you really want to go, I think this is going to be a great opportunity for you. 3 bedrooms available, able to sleep a couple people each. We're going to be kayaking, hiking, do all kinds of tours, whale watching tours, dolphin tours, lighthouse tours, glacier tours, eagle tours, potentially other kinds of tours. We're going to be shooting guns, having picnics, and of course the first annual ever Bitcoin conference in Alaska. If you have an interest in joining this event, feel free to reach out. It's coming up here in July. We're going to be celebrating the 249th anniversary of America's independence, also with July 4th celebrations. Alex Gladstein is going to be there, Lisa Huff's going to be there, Adam O'Brien, and about a dozen other speakers, which I don't have time to get into here. Same phone number, text the phone number on the screen. Let's have a conversation about getting you in one of these slots before it all fills up. Now, speaking of getting in before it goes up, or before it's too late, let's finally get to that Bitcoin price discussion. So what you see in white here is the M2 supply of money. Now, surely you've seen a chart like this if you've been anywhere on the Bitcoin interwebs in the last few days, but I think it's really important to clarify some things. What you see here is the Bitcoin price in orange, and you see the M2 price in white. Now, if this continues, if this pump continues, and Bitcoin follows this trend, and it goes up as a function of money going up, we're going to go from $87,000, $90,000, $91,000, $92,000, which is where we are right now, and we're going to rapidly accelerate to $120,000, $140,000, $170,000, $190,000, potentially pretty rapidly by early to mid-summer here. Now, is this a guarantee? No, it's totally not. Obviously, I'm not going to say that, oh, I'm predicting that based on this one chart, but it's a really interesting concept to have. And we haven't even begun lowering rates to the degree I think we're going to lower them over the rest of the year. We haven't even begun printing money or expanding them to, like I think we potentially could be over the course of the rest of the year. And so you have to prepare yourself. You have to ask yourself, what are you going to do when Bitcoin doubles and triples from here? This is why it's so important you increase your Bitcoin stack now. For all of my clients at the Bitcoin Advisor, we are focused on helping them increase their Bitcoin stack, right? They're paying our company 1%. On average, they're increasing the Bitcoin stack between 5 to 50 to 60%, depending on the person's situation and what kind of resources are at their availability. So if you're somebody who has the ability to help your spouse, your family, yourself, your business partner, if you're able to help them all understand Bitcoin 6 months earlier, it's going to make all the difference and potentially get them twice as much Bitcoin for their efforts. I think this is something that is really, really optimistic. And sure, I think it's totally possible the tariffs could come back and rear their ugly head and cause a recession and cause all kinds of turmoil in the markets, etc. Sure, that could happen, and Bitcoin could go back down to $70,000, maybe even $60,000 if we have some sort of deep, deep recession, potentially even lower. But like I said at the beginning of the video, we've been flat over the course of the last year. For the last year, we've been building a base above $50,000, $60,000 or so, right? Back in 2021, Bitcoin could barely spend a few weeks above $55,000 per coin. Okay, we've just spent a year consolidating in this $50,000 to $70,000 range. We've only had a month of up action, and I think it's very likely that after building this solid base in the mid 5 figures, that we not only reach the 6 figures again, but potentially we begin building a new base in the 6 figures at some point later this year, if not early next year. So whatever the case, I think Bitcoin is going up. I think this 4% move of the last couple days is not the end. I think it's the very, very beginning. And no, I don't think you're too late to this potential up move in Bitcoin. But let's talk about the bigger deal. More than the big deal of the last few days, more than the big deal of the next few months, more than the big deal of being, oh, I'm the top 1 in 1,000 MicroStrategy shareholder. Let's talk about the big deal, the biggest deal. Everything is fine until everything collapses, right? This chart was discussed in yesterday's video, but I want to talk about it here again briefly because it's so important. This is the stock market and the bond market of the Dutch, okay? This was a few hundred years ago. This is a big long-term cycle. This cycle took about 300 years to unfold. This time, I don't think it's going to take 300 years. I think it's going to be much, much faster than it was in history. But let's focus on this, because as much as we can say, oh, wow, look at how much M2 went up. Bitcoin's going to 150 grand, 200 grand. You got to realize, this is when the bond market and the stock market are continuing to survive. Someday, they will not survive, and we are going to print the dollar into irrelevance, right? Forget about $100,000 or $200,000 a coin. We're going to be looking at millions and millions and millions of dollars a coin. Why? Because the Dutch were the world's most powerful empire a few centuries ago, and then the most powerful monopoly, most powerful navy, and they had the most powerful trade routes of the world. They were beating the British in all kinds of wars and skirmishes, right? And everything was great, just like now in America, how everything's great. We have our little proxy wars, we have the big army, we have the big economy, we have the hugest economy, right? Everything's fine, right? But just like with the Dutch, everything was fine, everything was great until they demonetized their own spice trade. The spices were the asset side of the balance sheet. They were so effective in making more, they demonetized it. America has the same problem with housing, with data, with stock valuations, with everything else on our balance sheet. The Dutch were so effective, they eroded the value of their balance sheet, had a feedback loop of cultural decline, and the debt exploded, and then, of course, their treasuries, their bonds collapsed. Debt can continue to be refinanced then and now here in America, until suddenly there is no demand for U.S. debt. And I think that is coming, right? 5 years ago in 2020, when I started realizing that the treasury market was broken. Now here we are 5 years later in 2025, we're seeing other billionaires, out there more than just there were a few years ago, saying that they're concerned about debt, they're concerned about America's long-term solvency, right? This has become a main common narrative to say, right? You know, Elon Musk, the most famous person in the world, arguably out there, is talking about that, right? Stocks can continue to expand valuations until there is no demand for the debt. Because if there's no demand for the debt, nobody can refinance. If the U.S. government can't refinance, then the companies can't refinance. If the companies can't refinance, then these valuations completely blow up. Most of the companies on the S&P 500 are also going up today, kind of like Bitcoin. But what you have to remember is that these companies are pricing in literally a century of perfection. 20 years, 50 years, 100 years worth of profitability and perfection is being priced in. That's just probably not a good plan when the treasury market is probably not going to last another century, in my opinion, right? Now, it can go a long time. The Dutch did make it for 300 years, but then the whole thing fell apart. Stocks collapsed, yields on their bonds skyrocketed, and the spices that they made their entire monopoly on became affordable for everyone. This was good for the planet. Who was this bad for? It was bad for the people that were trying to save their premium in a number that could be printed. The same thing is going to be true with stocks and bonds. And so this is going to take years to unfold. I've been saying this for 5 years, and we are only beginning now to see Bitcoin wake up. It's been bobbling around for the last 5 years, but we are going to have less in common with the near future than the ancient past. Bitcoin is going to have more market cap accumulation. It's going to have a larger additional value in the next 6 to 18 months than the previous 15 years, okay? You yourself are going to have a higher net worth increase in the next year than the previous 3 years, 5 years, 10 years combined, potentially, right? Assuming Bitcoin doubles or triples, that's all it takes for you to have less in common in the future and the past. And guess what? The same thing's going to be true. We're going to go from 80K to 200K. The same statement is going to be true as we go from 200K to 500K, 800K, or a million, right? Perpetually, every couple years, Bitcoin is going to have more value accretion, more new users, more potential attacks than the entire history combined, right? This is how these feedback loops grow. This is how these exponential trends grow. The globally dominant reserve asset is the risk-free rate for the world. That used to be treasuries of the United States. Long ago, it used to be the treasuries of the Dutch, right? But it used to be the treasuries of the United States, or it is right now, I should say, and is becoming Bitcoin. This is not an overnight thing. This is not going to take 5 years. This is going to take probably more like 50 years. But guess what? We're already 15 years into this 50-year transition, right? Growing up, when I was little, and I'm still relatively young compared to, many of you much wiser, more experienced people out there. But for me, when I was young, 10, 15 years ago, when I was growing up, everybody told me, Luke, you're so smart. Luke, you should study history. Luke, it's so great. Watch these documentaries. Luke, it's so great that you're doing all this, right? Oh, you're going to do great things when you grow up, right? And now that I talk about, oh my gosh, the treasury market's going to fail. Everyone's got to buy Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's the future. Bitcoin's a monetary singularity area. It's going to take everybody's jobs and blah, blah, blah. Right now, I talk about that. A lot of those people don't call me smart anymore. A lot of those people don't necessarily encourage us anymore, right? They're like, are you okay? Like, what happened to you, right? And a lot of people don't want to accept this. But I do believe this is what is coming. We're going to print more currency in the next 5 years than potentially printed in the last 20 years, right? We saw this in the 2020 pandemic. We printed more currency. In every iteration from here, we're going to print more currency than the sum total combined, okay? It took from 1779 to 1981 to get the first $1 trillion in national debt here in the United States, okay? We're adding another trillion every 90, 100 days or so, right? We have less in common than the near future and the past in terms of Bitcoin price and in terms of dollars printed. And if you think that your grocery prices are as high as they're ever going to be, or if you think that housing is unaffordable, just wait another 5 years. We're going to print so many dollars into existence. Everything's going to go up in price, including and especially Bitcoin. We're seeing with this with the gold rally. The gold rally has been dramatic. Gold price is now at $3,400, $3,500 or whatever, right? It's had an absolute rocket ship to the moon. And every percentage point that gold goes up, Bitcoin is probably at some point going to be going up 5%, right? So somebody in the comments below, please tell me how I'm wrong. I know a lot of you out there try to tell me how I'm wrong. Frankly, a lot of you aren't very convincing, but somebody out there who maybe is convincing, please tell me why I'm wrong. For 5+ years, half a decade now, my belief in this only continues to get stronger, and every time I find somebody that disagrees with me or tries to disprove me, either they're strong-manning the Bitcoin argument, or they don't actually understand what I'm trying to say. If they don't actually understand what I'm trying to say, how am I to expect that they've actually given this some thought, right? So, the faster we build new productivity, the faster we have the collateral problem, and the faster everything collapses in terms of Bitcoin to never recover. We're not talking about a 20 to 40% collapse. We're talking about 97, 98, maybe even 99% collapse in terms of Bitcoin. So everyone's going to say this time is different, but I don't think this time is going to be different. I think after hundreds of examples in history, we can say that this time isn't going to be different. We can't monetize the debt forever when we are demonetizing the goods and services that everybody wants, right? That we have less in common with the near future and the past, okay? We are closer to the end of the U.S. Treasuries market than the beginning. We are closer to $1 quadrillion of debt in America than we are closer to, let's say, 2000 or 1990, right? We're closer to $1 quadrillion than we are to $1 trillion. And all the comment section people down below complaining would say, oh, Luke, that's not true, because $35 trillion of debt's way closer to 1 trillion than $1 quadrillion. What are you talking about? Are you high? Ha, ha, ha. No, in terms of timeline, we're way closer to $1 quadrillion than we are to $1 trillion, right? And likewise, you watching this, dear viewer, are probably way closer to a $10 million or $50 million net worth than you are to zero. It may not feel like that because your net worth in dollar terms is closer to zero than 50 or $100 million, but I'm telling you, it's rapidly accelerating faster than you think. We are closer to the end of these Bitcoin conferences and little retreats than we are to the beginning, okay? These kinds of little events and that I'm talking about, the reason I'm talking about them so much is that these things aren't going to necessarily exist, or if they do exist, they're not going to be publicly advertised anymore. They're going to be in private groups. They're going to be privately with individuals that everyone within the group already knows, right? That's not saying that you aren't special. That's just saying that it's a matter of practicality. You can't have a private Bitcoin retreat just advertising it to the world when everybody there has a net worth of 10 million to $500 million or whatever, right? So the point is, in terms of the things available to you and making friends in Bitcoin, you have less in common with the future than the past, right? Michael Saylor issuing his securities, he is less in common with the future than the past. He's going to make more money in the next couple of years than he's made in his entire 30-year career, right? Likewise for you, we're going to print more dollars in the near future than the ancient past. Bitcoin price is going to go up more in the near future than the ancient past, and it's why it's critical you have a conversation with somebody who's an expert in taxes, Bitcoin accumulation, legal protection, whatever it is, to get your Bitcoin stack ready. The next 2x, 3x, 5x, 10x is going to dramatically change your life. Maybe you've been through a 5x or a 10x in Bitcoin price before, but the next 10x is literally 10 times of a bigger deal than the last 10x that you rode through. So you got to make sure you're asking the questions. How do I properly self-custody my Bitcoin? How do I make sure I'm not getting too overexposed to Saylor coin and other Bitcoin derivatives and securities, right? How do I make sure I'm protected against lawsuits? How to make sure I'm protected with my taxes? And most importantly, the biggest cost of all, how do I maximize my opportunity cost so that I'm stacking as much Bitcoin as possible? If you want to have a conversation about that, feel free to reach out to me. You have my number. If you don't want to talk about these kinds of events, reach out to me. Let's have a conversation about how we can get you as much Bitcoin as possible. I'm having trouble zooming in there, but there's the phone number. Text the phone number on the screen. Let's have a conversation with how to get you as much Bitcoin as possible, as soon as possible, before the price of Bitcoin runs away from us and it goes up. Because when it goes up, I think the probability is consistently lowering that we return to this $80,000 range. Every day we spend below $100,000, it increases the probability that once we exceed 100 grand, we're never coming back below 100 grand. Maybe we will, we probably will, but there's no guarantee. Why? Because we're printing more and more money. Even if we fall in real terms in the future, there's no guarantee we fall in nominal terms. So thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give me a shout, give me a text if you want to join one of these 2 special Bitcoin events coming up, or if you just want to have a conversation with how to increase your Bitcoin stack. But whatever the case, I wish you all the best. I hope you're enjoying this beautiful, beautiful weather that's coming here in summer, and that you get ready for Bitcoin summer, because I think it is rapidly approaching.